It's a new day on Deep Space Nine and the Defiant is returning home. A few days scouting the Gamma Quadrant for Dominion activity only turned up a handful of minor faults with the ship, ones for which Dax teases Worf's exacting standards. Over in Quark's, as Bashir and O'Brien are off to play a game in a holosuite and Lita reminds we viewers that she and Bashir are getting it on, Quark is bemoaning his profits. It's a Bajoran month of abstinence, and that means no drinking, no gambling, and no holographic having it off, the result being a mostly deserted bar. Quark's foul mood means he has no time for Rom the underappreciated brother being ill, but at least him collapsing at work gives Quark a reason to withhold his pay. A trip to Bashir, who presumably cut his holosuite time short, reveals a very serious ear infection, and by serious I mean nearly doing a dead, but then he has had it for several weeks by this point. He couldn't take time off to see Bashir and get it fixed because that would be against his employment contract. The concept of sick leave is alien to the Ferengi, along with pretty much any other benefit you can think of, and that has Bashir casually observing that they need a union. That, too, is an alien concept to the Ferengi. If everybody's treated fairly, where's the motivation to find success and become the arsehole boss that you hate? It's a position he comes to regret, as Quark calls everybody together when Rom arrives back at the bar. Slow business means he's going to cut everybody's pay by a third. Lita's complaint is met by an alternative offer of being unemployed, and that's enough to get Rom involved. Quark tells him to bollocks as well, and doesn't care about Rom's promise that he'll regret the decision, which is pretty ballsy when you consider Rom's already tried to kill him once. We'll leave Rom to plot revenge and catch up to Dax and Worf. The sparring of the last episode is continuing, it seems, with Dax practicing the use of Worf's fancy stabber. A noise interrupts Dax's latest attempt to flirt, and Worf's decision to twat the ceiling disgorges somebody carrying a bag of goods, at least one item of which appears to belong to Worf. In short, he's been robbed. A complaint to Odo that such security lapses wouldn't have happened under him gets nowhere. Odo's already researched all the times security went to shit under Worf's watch on the Enterprise, and has the receipts to prove it. On a station that has people coming and going on the reg, such things are even harder to control. Worf will just have to live with it. Speaking of which, living with it is something Rom, the underappreciated brother, has decided he won't do anymore. He's called a meeting for all of Quark's employees, and once he brings himself to actually say the word, he tells them they're going to form a union. Reaction is mixed. Some people are delighted by the idea, but every other Ferengi in the room is aghast. Even mentioning the dreaded U word is enough to drop them right in the shit. The Ferengi Commerce Authority shows no mercy towards any who harbour such ideas. Rom doesn't care. He's tired of Quark's shit, and the FCA can go do one as well. If they're going to pay for even talking about a union, then they might as well go the whole hog and do it, and rephrasing it as an opportunity seems to win over the other Ferengi. That means learning more about unions, so Rom goes back to Bashir, who gave him the idea. Bashir's a little surprised Rom actually did it, but O'Brien's delighted. Union blood runs through his veins, a minor relation from a few hundred years back, having been a Union leader. The miners' strike that his ancestor led got everything they wanted eventually. A shame that he wasn't around to see the end of it, you know, what with him being murdered and all. The conversation with Quark goes about as well as you'd expect. Worker demands are given, Quark laughs at them, and Rom calls an immediate strike. Quark laughs some more as they leave, though finds it increasingly less funny when he realizes they're not fucking about. It's so serious, in fact, that they formed a picket line, and Rom is paying people to not visit Quark's. That's enough for Quark to get Odo involved, or try to anyway, as Odo finds multiple holographic Quarks performing the jobs that he no longer has the staff for, at least when they're not malfunctioning, because he got them on the cheap. Odo tells the real Quark to balls when he demands the picket line be removed, not because he likes it being there, but because Sisko has specifically told him to not get involved as long as it stays peaceful and they don't physically block anybody who wants to come in. That gives Bashir and O'Brien a new game to play, guessing which potential punters will be scabs and cross the picket line. They're both shocked when Worf goes in and O'Brien stomps after him to correct what they see as an injustice. The subsequent disagreement sees Bashir, O'Brien and Worf in Odo's holding cells. Their desire to explain Worf's error to him became a little more passionate than anticipated, and that's enough to convince Sisko that he needs to get involved. The meeting between Sisko and Quark is a simple one. Quark explains that negotiating with strikers would be a fundamental betrayal of his culture, and Sisko explains that, if he doesn't, the rent, maintenance and energy bills for Quark's bar, ones that Sisko has overlooked for the last few years, will become due. Given the choice, Quark decides that maybe his culture could survive him negotiating after all. This is Quark, though, so his idea of negotiation is to bribe Rom. He's tempted, briefly, but decides against it, and instead starts spouting communist rallying cries. I guess that's yet another culture the Non-Interference Federation has fucked up, then. Or perhaps not, as it looks like Ferengi culture intends to fight back. Brunt of the Ferengi Commerce Authority is waiting in Quark's bar, and he intends to make sure this worrying state of affairs is corrected. The two heavies he's brought with him suggests it will not be through negotiation. In a surprising turn of events, Brunt is open to negotiating. Well, sort of. He breaks his way into a union meeting and tells everybody there that if they were on Ferenginar, he'd have them very publicly murderized. But being here, surrounded by all this insidious nonsense from people like the Federation, means they should be offered a compromise. And that compromise is, go back to work now and we'll forget all about it. Once he's gone, Rom tells them that Brunt's threats mean nothing. If they had anything back on Ferenginar that Brunt could take away from them, they wouldn't be working at a bar on a space station, which somewhat overlooks the fact that he has a mother there, but let's ignore that for now. It's a sufficiently rousing speech to continue the strike, and off they go back to the picket line. They're watched by O'Brien as Worf approaches him on the promenade. He's here to apologize for the not a fight in Quark's bar, and says it's largely due to him being on edge with living on the station. That's why he's found a solution. He's going to move on to the Defiant. If he's hoping that'll prevent him getting robbed again, I'd have probably reminded him that the whole ship got nicked a while back, but he seems happy with the idea, so we'll leave him to it. To a corridor we go where Lita is complimenting Rom on standing up to Brunt. She goes off for a date with Bashir, but not before giving some affection to Rom first. He's so distracted afterwards that he takes a while to register Quark turning up. He's here to try and warn Rom that Brunt isn't going to play silly buggers forever, though he's clearly not concerned enough to meet Rom's demands. That's a reflection of their life together, it seems, and Rom's sick of being the underappreciated brother, regularly demeaned to make Quark feel better about himself. Quark has another go at convincing him, his concern seemingly genuine now, but Rom's too angry to care. The lack of progress is poorly received by Brunt back in Quark's bar. He needs to shut this down before it escalates, but he thinks making an example of Rom would turn him into a hero. No, he needs to send a message another way, through someone Rom cares about, for example. Lita's the obvious choice, but Brunt's taken a shine to her himself, so she's off the cards. Luckily, there is another option. Rom is visiting Quark in the infirmary. Those Nausicaans did a fair job of beating the absolute shit out of him, and that was despite being interrupted by Odo. They and Brunt are currently locked up, Odo saying it will be an easy conviction, but it doesn't matter as Quark won't be pressing charges. The FCA would just send another representative, and that one would solve the problem by making everybody involved have terrible accidents. No, the only way to fix this permanently is by killing the Union. Or, to be more specific, making it look like they've killed the Union. Those bonks on the noggin have jump-started Quark's brain, and he tells Rom that he'll give them everything they want. All they have to do is pretend they lost. Worf is embracing his solution too. If he was hoping he'd get some peace as a result, then he's shit out of luck as Dax is visiting before he's even finished moving. She's also of the opinion that this is just delaying the inevitable, but Worf doesn't agree. Just because they're all willing to tolerate so many things being wrong on DS9 doesn't mean he has to. At least one thing wrong has been corrected. Quark's bar is back open again and fully staffed. Well, not quite fully, as one person has decided to seek alternative employment. Rom's time alone has made him realize that he does far better when he's not being the underappreciated brother, so he's taken a job as a technician for the station. After a little initial hesitation, Quark accepts the decision, Rom's performance over the last few days perhaps convincing him that he'll be fine. Or maybe he's realized that a technician won't have time to run a union. Besides, he'll still be in here regularly and keep everything running, but now he'll be a paying customer too. So we'll leave Rom to have his first experience of Quark taking orders from him until the next adventure. Rom's days of being the underappreciated brother, whilst not entirely over, are at least on the wane. Quark's abusive behaviour towards him has been a constant throughout the show, and Rom has finally acknowledged what he's capable of when he's freed from the shadow of humiliation. The topic is more complicated, though, as the purpose of Quark's behaviour isn't purely aggression. There's a heavy element of that, sure, and Rom's on the money when he says that shitting on him makes Quark feel better about himself, but that's not the only reason. Their mother, Ishka, his beloved Mugi, always kept Rom safe and gave him preferential treatment. The reason she gave for that, when she was being honest with Quark, was that she knew Rom wasn't cut out for being in business. Ferengi culture exploits people like Rom, and she wanted to counteract that as much as possible. Quark is doing the same of a sort. His constant belittling acts in part to ensure that Rom doesn't try and make a go of things on his own in Ferengi business and get absolutely clusterfucked as a result. Is that deeply misguided and a cause of harm? Absolutely, but there is a vein of compassion at the core of his abuse, and while that doesn't make it right, it can make it easier to understand. The thing is, Rom's smarter than both Quark and their mother put together in his own way, and has already realized he's not cut out for Ferengi business, likely influenced in no small part by Eggnog doing the same. He becomes a technician for the station because he's accepted this, along with the knowledge that his relationship with Quark was a toxic one that held him back. Rom removing himself from a system where he was never going to thrive means he can not only accomplish more, but also be happier. Which, by means of a smooth and professional segue, is precisely what Worf is doing as well. See, I do put some thought into these analyses occasionally. Worf, too, has removed himself from a system where he was never going to thrive, at least insofar as he can. By controlling his rest environment, he's created order in the chaos that was draining him. Or, to use an analogy that many of us understand on a personal level, by ensuring his home life uses as few spoons as possible, he maximizes how many he can spend on other challenges. And that spicy brain parallel continues in the scene with Dax when he's moving in. Perhaps in the end it will be all of you that have to adapt to me. On the surface, that sounds like an egotistical response, an expectation that the world will have to bend to accommodate him, but this view doesn't take into account that many living environments were simply not designed with all users in mind. To give a real-world example, conventions can be an absolute barrel of shite for people with sensory issues. The bombardment of sights and sounds and all those people can easily overwhelm. A growing trend of providing quiet rooms can give people a place to recharge away from those distractions and increase overall attendance as a result. I've personally been to retro gaming gatherings before where the availability of a quiet room meant I was able to stay for longer and influenced my decision to return. That's just one example of how changing environments to be more accommodating for all can improve the experience. When Worf says people should adapt to him, it's not an indication that he believes he's more important. It is instead a statement that the current arrangement isn't working for him, and other people suggesting that's a fault on his part are simply wrong. He's not asking everybody else to move on to the Defiant, he simply wants the option for himself. In short, he's making a quiet room so that he can still attend the gathering without being overwhelmed. A couple of other bits to touch on from this episode then. The first is a throwaway gag with the Nausicaans. Having them play darts by using each other's bodies as the target is a silly little detail, and all the more welcome because of it. Regulars here will know that I enjoy incidental additions that aren't directly tied to the plot, and this was a good example. The story would have chugged along perfectly fine without it, but its inclusion here helps flesh out the Nausicaans as more than just tall slabs of intimidation. Lastly, I'd like to consider the implications of Quark having holographic versions of himself working around his bar. Whilst that wouldn't require the full network of holo-emitters that you see in a suite, there'd still need to be basic coverage for the entire establishment and outside it for it to work. More than that, the coverage is unlikely to be a new thing either. Even if the engineering staff on the station had the time and parts to install such coverage at short notice, which is unlikely given how busy O'Brien is on the average day, I don't think that either Starfleet or Bajoran authorities would have been inclined to undermine a labour dispute. That means Quark either had them installed by a third party, which I don't see O'Brien being fine with even if Quark could get it done at short notice, or they were already there, which raises the question of why that would be the case. The real answer, of course, is that whoever wrote the joke of having holographic quarks didn't consider the technical requirements or thought it was funny enough to apply the rule of cool, a decision I'm inclined to agree with, but it still gives us something to think about. Personally, I'm going to use the headcanon that Quark had already tried to replace his staff with holograms previously, and Rom, who installed the system for him, made it deliberately faulty to protect their jobs, and maybe just a little bit to dick with Quark, too. End of episode.
I suppose I shouldn't ask you where you got the candles from.
Bum stuff.
Yeah, I thought so.
Okay, so we've got ourselves a pentagram, and we've got ourselves some candles. Now all we have to do is give the incantation.
It's got form then, has it? This magical incantation of yours?
Oh, absolutely. It's from ancient Earth history. Every data point I've got suggests the magic tome was written by a powerful witch.
Alright then, son, let's get out of here. Off you go.
Quote Icha, Laura Ine. I know.
I don't want to be a downer, but...
We're still here. Yes, I noticed.
Maybe it needs to be chanted? You know, like a repetition thing.
Worth a go. Quote Icha, Laura Ine. Quote Icha, Laura Ine. Quote Icha, Laura Ine. Quote Icha,
I get the feeling we're going to be here a while.
Quote Icha, Laura Ine. Quote Icha, Laura Ine.